Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. All right, welcome back for episode 199 of the Freight 360 podcast. If you are brand new, welcome. We're glad you found us. And if you've been with us for a while, we continued your continued listenership. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and like the video if you're watching it on YouTube. Leave a review if you're on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. And make sure to keep sharing us with all your friends. We're growing, and we're coming up on 200 episodes next week. And make sure if you want to get even more information on how to be a successful freight broker, don't forget, check out our course, the Freight Broker Basics course. You can go right to our website. There's a link also in the show notes. Ben, how you doing today, man?
I am doing well. Apart from it being a little warm this time of year, week's going pretty well. Nice short week with the holiday. How was your 4th of July? Yeah,
we're going to actually talk about that in the news section today about 4th of July and whatnot. But it's warming up pretty aggressively in the Northeast. Like they said, I saw something the other day. The global average temperature hit an all-time record high sometime like in the last week. And it's like not a very high temperature when you hear it. It was like 60 degrees or something like that. But when you consider
yes,
Antarctica, right?
Is playing into the averages, and the coldest places on Earth that have negative 30-degree temperatures, right?
Yep.
All the time. Yes. Yeah.
It was like a sliver above the highest previous record. It was like 0.1 degrees higher or something like that. But still, it's warm. We had a lot of humidity over the 4th of July long holiday weekend and all that. But overall, good weather for fireworks.
What are your lows at night? Does it get around 70s? 60s?
I'll just tell you. So the low today is 68, and that's going to be an overnight low. So it's nice. It's always nice when you can just walk outside at nighttime and it feels, just nice and refreshing. You know what I mean?
I was jealous of thinking of you last night. We walked the dogs at like 8:45 to 9, and it's been dark for a while. And I looked at the temperature and it was like 84, 85, but with the humidity, it still felt like 90 degrees. Like I was still soaking wet when I came back in. And I was like, man, I do really wish that we had at least a cool evening, at least some break, but it's what it is.
Well, today's high is 87 degrees here in Buffalo. So I'll take it. Yeah. Well, this episode is brought to you by Blue Book. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce. Their online database contains thousands of companies throughout the produce industry supply chain. You can easily search their database to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com and click join today. That's producebluebook.com. Also, don't forget, there is still an ongoing survey. There's a link in the show notes for a chance to win one of 3 separate $1,000 gift cards. So check it out. It's like a 5-minute survey. Talk about some of your struggles, pain points in brokerage, as well as the things that you're succeeding in. So check that out in the show notes. All right, for sports. It's that time of year. There's not like a whole lot going on, like besides baseball. So I found an interesting stat relating to sports, and I don't know how we've never talked about this because I feel like it's such a hot topic, is pickleball. I hear everyone talking about pickleball. So here's the stat. It's the fastest growing game in America. It grew by 159% over the last 3 years. They're up to an estimated 9 million players in the United States. So I got to ask, Ben, are you a pickleball guy?
I do play pickleball. In fact, there is now a pickleball court in almost every tennis court and property in Palm Beach. Like literally every park that has a tennis court now has it also lined for pickleball. And one of my daughter's friends' dad, who we kind of hang out with, and their family, when our kids play at the park, him and I will go play pickleball. So I play sometimes once or twice a week, but yeah, it's a fun game, honestly. I really, it's like ping pong and tennis. Like,
I was going to ask, is that kind of like where the crossover is?
Yeah, it really is much more like ping, even like the spin on the ball, right? Because it's basically a big, thick wiffle ball with, paddles that are similar to like wood, real similar to ping pong, or they have like high performance ones. So you spin the ball real similar to like ping pong, and the court's smaller and shallower. So honestly, even getting back into shape, like I used to play tennis a lot. There's no way. Like I played racquetball with my son a couple years ago. My knees hurt so bad just because I'm not used to doing that.
Yeah.
Pickleball is like a nice transition into like a full active sport because you don't really have to run. The court's small enough. It's only like 4 or 5 steps to get one side to the other.
Yep.
So it's really an enjoyable game. And especially like my older friends that I play golf with, they're in their 70s and 80s. A lot of them play pickleball now at the clubs. Like they'll play golf and then Sundays they'll play pickleball.
I did notice, like you said, a lot of the tennis courts are now starting to have pickleball. So we take my kids to like a kid's soccer thing, and it's at one of the local schools. And I'm walking past the tennis courts and I'm like, what is that small thing? And I'm like, oh, it's pickleball. Because I've never played. I've seen it
next time you're down here
before. And next time I'm in Florida, you'll have to embarrass me on pickleball and show me all the rules and whatnot. But interesting little stat there. It's like, there's all these trends with different sports that come up. Like, for example, like even like fitness in general, like the whole Peloton thing got really big. Pickleball's gotten big. It's wild.
The funny thing about pickleball is there was an article this week. They released the insurance cost numbers related to pickleball, and pickleball has been insurance. Yes, hold on. So pickleball has been a lifeline for seniors, but the sports injuries may cost Americans nearly $400 million this year.
Oh.
UBS estimates that the cost of pickleball-related injuries in 23 will climb to $377 million, with a majority due to outpatient care.
I did hear something about that recently, too. That's a funny stat. Interesting.
But hey, I'd rather people be active and moving a little farther on that end, because there were lots of stats and reports I saw this summer on like longevity in the US falling drastically, and like just the average lifespan in lots of areas in the country is declining as opposed to increasing for maybe the first time in 70 years since World War II. Maybe, I don't know, but it's a thing, and it's nice to see people are actually getting out to try to take some control of their health and to actually get active and do those things.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Agreed. Well, on the news side of things, we just got through the 4th of July here, and I wanted to take at least a little bit, a couple minutes here and talk about what happens to the freight world specifically when we have 4th of July or any other holiday really that ends, especially when it lands during a regular business day. Like if the 4th of July lands on a Sunday, it's not going to have as much impact as a Tuesday like we had this year, right? And there's really I would say probably 2 to 3 big reasons why we see, typically an increase in rates and just there's an impact, right? And to give you the statistic, and we saw this, we were on RateView yesterday, and we were able to see like in the 3-day, the past 3 days, there was a spike in one of the lanes we were looking at. But I did some research, and it said on average, freight rates will anywhere from 5 to 20% is the spike you'll see around a holiday like that. So number one, there's going to be there's one less workday in the week, right? So you might have companies that are trying to get all their work done with 20% less time to do it. So that's one part. Number two, you're going to have less capacity because you have drivers that may want to get home and spend time with their families. And you're going to have, if you're going to have them working, they're going to want a premium rate. And number three is the demand, right? Because as you come up to certain holidays, there's a demand for certain goods, like specifically 4th of July, fireworks, right? Like there's a lot of fireworks, there's a lot of food, any kind of consumable items. Yeah, exactly, right?
Chip beverage season.
So, but what's
there's
cool
a fourth. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's cool though is you can use this as an opportunity, and it's not just the 4th of July. Think about Thanksgiving, the Christmas, New Year's holiday season, Halloween, Easter, Valentine's Day, right? All of these, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all these holidays, they have an increase in demand for a certain commodity, and they can disrupt the capacity in a certain area or just in general around that time. And if you can get ahead of that and educate your customers, you're adding value that way. But you can also, if you can be a good problem solver and be able to secure good capacity ahead of time, you can make some pretty good money getting loads moved in and around those times.
Yeah. And the one that is kind of related to the first one about a shorter week, right? And this is the one that I've seen the most, or that my brain goes to, right? It's a, transportation and the way trucks move tend to fall in patterns, right? So let's just take a small trucking company, for example. And, let's say you got two drivers and you have a customer that is local to your yard that you run, front hauls out of every Monday. Your drivers start the week at your customers. And let's just say it's a 2-day run. Now, normally your guys are empty on Wednesday. So they likely have a broker they're working with or another customer where they will pick up to get to where they need to Thursday or Friday. So there's predictability in the way trucks want to move, right? That's no surprise, right? But that affects brokers as well as shippers, right? So from the first instance, if Monday doesn't happen because everybody's closed, those trucks start their day Tuesday, which means they are not where they normally are Wednesday, which means that broker who usually relies on them to pick up from their customer Wednesday now has to go to the spot market. Those guys arrive on Thursday. They will usually take a different load than they normally do because of the change in days and just the way production gets shifted, right? So it really shifts not only the way the drivers move direct with shippers, it also changes the way the spot market functions because of the days in which people are going to work. And then you add that to the other two you mentioned of needing a premium, taking time off, and that disrupts it further. So just the predictable nature of how people start to use trucks over and over or work with each other just gets shifted a day in either direction. And now everybody's going to the well to get carriers they haven't really worked with, which creates an increase in demand in addition to the increase in freight that's shipped through the holiday because people buy more shit. People are going to have picnics. They buy more Coca-Cola, hot dogs, and yada, 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 paper plates all the way down through, right?
Yep. It's interesting you brought that up because that's the same. It's the same thing we kind of saw happen with the pandemic, but on a different scale, right? Like the pandemic was
everything
exactly
and longer. Exactly. Yep.
And it's so another funny like historical example that is in the first Gulf War in the early 90s. It was one of the biggest, and this is me being like a logistics officer nerd in the Army, it was one of the biggest lessons learned that came out of that conflict was the failed logistics systems for the military. And so what ended up being essentially a 4-day campaign to take back Kuwait. It took 6 months to get all the logistics like basically unhinged and all the containers to even just identify what was where and all that. Cause they did so much so fast and it was unorganized. It took 6 months to get caught up on a 4-day campaign there. So
it doesn't surprise me like that there are stories that go back, I'm sure further, but the one that always sticks out is there's a famous quote by Napoleon related to that like an army moves on its stomach. It actually might go back to like Rome, but it's the same point, right? You can move troops fast to get into attack a city or for a siege, but if you can't move the food in quick enough to feed them, it doesn't really matter and it's not going to succeed. Now, obviously it's more than the simple example in yours, but
no, that's
same principle.
It is. So again, not to get too nerdy here, I'm in a course for the Army right now and I'm in a military history section of it. And I'm using like historical battles and even going back to like Napoleon, for examples on how they figured out modern military tactics and like best practices. And the supply chain was always one of the biggest ones. If you can cut off the supply chain, you cut off the efficiency of the force. So, yep. All right. Well, hey, let's give a shout out to our friends at DAT and we'll get into the content today.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you'll know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Check out the show notes for a free month of DAT1.
Absolutely. And actually, one of the things that I never used it until I think last week with DAT. So I was helping somebody out with a bid. And like in the past, if I did like a bulk upload of all the lanes and everything, it would spit out. It would say like, do you want, the historical rates, back 12 months, 30 days, 7 days, whatever. They now have a rate cast into the future option. So it spit out the predicted future 12 months of like basically each month's
Mm-hmm.
average rate for those lanes. So then again, I went an entire year into the future, and it was interesting how you could kind of see that now. So if you're doing like a quarterly bid, you can see what they're projecting the next 3 months will have as far as average pricing goes. So
Well, don't bury
cool.
the lead. What did the future rates look like?
Well, it showed it still dipping down a little bit more for the next couple of months and then starting to come back up, because that's actually one of the things I took away from it was, are we at the bottom yet? So we'll see. But again, no one really knows. The data we have is, it doesn't account for things that we haven't thought of or that we don't even know are going to happen yet. So, like a pandemic 3 years ago that we didn't know was coming. So,
well, I mean, that's a good segue into what we were going to talk about today, which is following the tender. And really what that means, for people that don't know the terminology, this is like a basic level understanding of who you should be actually prospecting for what you're prospecting for. So again, 101 level, you have the procurement department, which typically is involved in just approving vendors that work with that company. So procurement approves the vendors that sell paper towels to the facility in the same way they approve somebody that sells light bulbs all the way through the trucking companies that they work with. It's all of their vendors. That's what procurement management actually is, right? Procurement is just the procurement of services. I know you use the word to define itself. You're getting stuff, right? They're negotiating the best deals, the companies they want to work with based on the criteria developed by their attorneys and their company's history. That's what they do. They are not responsible typically for actually tendering, which is a verb, the action of sending a load to a broker or a carrier. The person who tenders the load is the person you work with on a day-to-day basis. They're the people that you ask the questions about operations to understand what they need, what is important to them. Is it on time percentage? Rate is always part of it. But you want to know about what are the other things, like, aside from rate, does on-time percentage matter to these lanes? Does it matter to your customer? Are these shipments coming in, with a day's notice and they got to get booked tomorrow? Do you guys have a week to work on them? These are all questions and understandings related to the person in operations that tenders the freight. They are the key to how much or how little you will actually earn by working with this customer, right? Procurement opens the door. Once you're in, you're in. You very rarely deal with them other than maybe on an annual basis. They'll send the bids out and things and evaluate large contracts, but on a day-to-day basis, as a freight broker, who you're prospecting is the person tendering the freight, right? And we're going to talk about the different titles and the different situations that exist in the industry so you can ask good questions to navigate a situation to understand who this person actually is, so you're not selling for months to somebody that doesn't even have the ability to give you business.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, the size of the company is going to affect how that all looks too. Like, for example, a small mom and pop shop, it could be the same person, but it's just doing two different
job
tasks, right? Just the same way that we say lead gen and prospecting are two different activities. They do heavily correlate to one another, and they're done by the same person. But as you get to a larger company, you are going to see the procurement team, or like the vendor approval team, if you want to call it that, separate from the actual traffic department who's handling inbound and outbound. And on top of that, your inbound and outbound might be two different departments depending on how large that facility is. These mega facilities that have hundreds of shipping dock doors, there's a lot going on there, and one person can't just wear the hat to do all the jobs.
Right. So some basics, right, for people to understand before we go a little further. Two really good places. One, pretty expensive. One, fairly cheap. To find titles to start to understand who's working in the company, right? Because as Nate pointed out, right, like the actual job of generating leads and hunting for who you're going to prospect is a skill in itself, right? It's very much like, I kind of like think about it as like, oh, I'm going to go do detective work, because I'm really not selling at that point. And even my calls and what I'm saying have nothing to do with sales. They're questions to help me understand and verify that I'm reaching or speaking to the person that I thought I was, which again is one of the things that I think more experienced brokers do better over time. And it's mostly because we make mistakes, right? It's not because anybody's smarter. It's because we prospected somebody that we found out 2 months later doesn't even have the business, can't send it to us anyway. And we're like, that was a shitty waste of my time. And then you learn who that person is and you don't want to make the mistake again, right? So what we're outlining are how you can do this at the beginning rather than learning the hard way, right? So LinkedIn, great place to go, whether you pay for Sales Navigator or you just use LinkedIn. It's a really good place to throw a company in your prospecting to see the different titles, right? You can throw some keywords in like logistics, transportation, shipping, trucking. What are some other keywords for titles you can think of to search within LinkedIn for job titles?
Traffic. Did you say traffic?
No, traffic. Yep. Traffic manager.
Procurement is one of them that some use too.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. Logistics is such a broad term that people they'll see logistics coordinator and say, "Ooh, I got to go after that person." And it's like I have seen that job title used dozens of ways, and none of them relate to one another. It's insane.
And that's the thing that I want to point out for everybody too, is right. Like the initial reaction is to just assume that this person does what their title says. But the thing about job titles is companies don't consult with other companies to make sure the title means something to another company. They don't care. These titles are derived and just literally created by that company to serve that company's purpose.
Yes.
So there's very little consistency from industry to industry, or even in the same niches on company to company, right? Like, again, some things that you won't see are, again, the titles of somebody that tenders freight in a lumber company are very different than a steel company, are very different than a company that ships, give me any kind of produce. But when you get into the niche and you start to see the titles and verify that this person is the one arranging the transportation or tendering the freight, you can start to use that in that niche to uncover other clues, right? So go through lumber, right? Like,
it's funny, as you're saying that, I pulled up a lumber company that's in the town next to me, and I just searched them up. They're big, and they have over 300 employees listed in their facility here in the town next to me. And I just searched keywords logistics. Now listen to this. There are 20 people that have logistics in their title. Do you think there's 20 people there, Ben, that tender freight?
Well, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Type in, you found 20 people with logistics in their titles. Can you type in trader for me real quick and tell me the number of people that have trader in their title?
Trader. Okay. 15.
Okay. Well, what I know from shipping lumber when I've done this, right, is that lumber is usually a weirder one in the sense that it's very commoditized, meaning when people buy lumber from one company is pretty comparable to lumber from another company. There's different grades and qualities, yes, but once you know the type of quality and grade you're buying, the buyers of lumber compare one company to the next, just like you compare dealerships to buy a car, right?
Yep.
So when you've got a very commoditized product, the traders tend to be the ones arranging transportation because they're the ones negotiating the sale of the truckloads of lumber to their customer. The logistics coordinators then tend to maybe just work with warehouses or deliveries to make sure that the times and dates work. But again, these are just guesses based on the way other ones work. I'm curious what it looks like.
A simple, like, so here's an idea, right? If you're like, I'll give you an example for like traders, right? You've got lumber trader, hardwood trader, lumber trader, just trader, hardwood trader, ripping division trader. So like you have all these different things, and what may be a smart thing, find someone fresh out of college that's fairly new and just connect and talk to them and find out as much as you can about, like, I see this one that's someone's a student interning, like, great person to hop on the phone with and just get as much information as you can, right?
So funny thing, right? I'm glad you pointed that out, right? I'm doing this in a lot of the bulk side of things, right? I'm doing more tanker work and more bulk side, right? And it's the first thing I look for. And Zoom Info actually has this tool too, where it'll tell you this person is likely to respond on LinkedIn. And anytime I see that, it's always, to your point, the youngest guy in, people that are new to the position because they want to expose themselves to learn more. So they're willing to respond easier.
Yes.
And it's funny you even said that. Like, I have 4 of those scheduled over the next week with people that meet that criteria, all in my industry, of the youngest guy there. And they said, look, I don't arrange transportation. I can find somebody that would help you. And I said, look, to be honest, I don't even really want to speak to them directly. If you've got 5 or 10 minutes, I'd love to pick your brain on just a few things that are general, right?
So back to my logistics search. What's interesting, a lot of these ones that match logistics are the traders, to your point, right? So their title might be lumber trader, hardwood trader, but if I go to their profile, it's going to have something about logistics in there. So,
yep.
Interesting point.
Well, and here's the other thing too, right? Why do they want to get on the phone with you? And why are these easy people to speak to get an understanding of the lay of the land? Because guess what? When you first get a job, what are you excited to do? You're excited to talk about it, right? Nobody wants to talk to you in the company. You don't know anything. You're just following people around doing what you're told until you learn. But when somebody externally goes, hey, no, I would really like to talk to you, you're flattering them. It makes them feel good. It's mutually beneficial, right? You help them out by giving them some connections. You're talking about what you maybe can add to the table, but you're also really just trying to understand, again, the questions. Hey, just curious, Paul, out of curiosity, who are the people or titles that actually tender the loads for the trucks? Like actually send out the rate cons and the load details when a load needs to be scheduled, right? Once you can get a confirmation of that, now you just, in your instance, found 20 prospects, right? I talked to the guy lowest on the pole, maybe 15 minutes. He's the easiest to call. I didn't have to cold call. I can probably get to him on LinkedIn, maybe find his email, or even just cold call and ask for that kid. Likely he'll call me back. And then I now have verified the titles at which I'm going to go hunt for to develop relationships to actually win some business, right? And the second approach is obviously you need to know who procurement is if you're not onboarded, because you're going to have conversations at the same time with procurement. And you should also be talking to the person that is tendering the business even before you're onboarded, because they're going to give you insight into what is important for procurement to approve you, right? We talked about that last week with one of the accounts you brought on.
Yeah. So to that point, I have a customer we're setting up last week, and literally the guy that tenders the loads, he's like telling us, excuse me, he's saying like, look, I want to work with you guys. We got to get you through our onboarding process through essentially the procurement team. And he's like, here's exactly what you need to do and what you need to say to make sure that you get approved. And he's trying to figure out, do you have this, or this affiliation? No, that doesn't work. All right. Because they're not taking on straight brokers right now. Oh, you have this. Cool. We can use that as a way to get you in. Make sure you say that when you talk to them. So it's kind of cool how you can navigate that process. But I want to circle back real quick too to LinkedIn, because this is worth noting. Just in my little search here, one of the really cool things you can do in your prospecting and lead gen is look at some of the insights that LinkedIn gives you. So I went to this one lumber company's page and look at their employees. On the right side, I'm getting affiliated pages. So companies that are affiliated with this lumber company. It's subsidiaries of them that are in the same kind of in the same industry. And then it also has pages that people also viewed. It's got competitors, it's got associations and groups, and all different kinds of things that will give you more ideas and more insight into where do I go next type thing. So I wanted to make sure I at least pointed that out. It's probably something that people don't always think to do.
No, and it's all helpful, right? Because the other biggest, I think, hurdle for newer brokers is like, what do I say when I get on the call, right? Having some insight into that niche and how that works, right? Like these are the things I talk about anyway. I very rarely in the first call or two am I talking about lanes and actual transportation specific. I'm having general conversations to understand the lay of the land, to determine who I want to go after, get any information I can to maybe help with a process, right? And the thing for everybody out there, those always change, right? Procurement's decisions on who they're approving right now are for what that company needs right now. A month from now, they may be different. 2 months from now, they may be different. A year ago, they most assuredly were different. So you want to have some inside information in how to approach procurement. The best point of contact for that, to your point, are the people that are actually in operations, tendering the freight, sending out the business, whether it be spot or contract. And also at the end of the day, those are the people that the pain points in the industry matter to the most. And it's not usually their manager or their manager's manager. And I think a lot of people in our heads, we think that the higher up, the more this matters to them. But the reality is they've got other responsibilities. And we don't say this enough, I think, but whoever you're prospecting, their business is not shipping. So everybody else in that organization, other than the person in operations, is worried about the other aspects of the business, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
people that care the most are the people on the front lines, right? In the trenches.
I'll give you an example. So I was in Nashville at we were at like the lobby bar restaurant just talking. It was some guys within the company, and someone overheard us talking about freight brokering, and he's like, just kind of like butts in. He's like, "Hey, what do you guys do?" And he's asking, and ends up he works for some company, and he doesn't work in the logistics department, but he's so frustrated because the whatever he's shipping to his customers, it's delayed. There's been damages, and he's frustrated and he's pissed off, and it's like bingo, like huge pain point that you can use to bring up to that company.
Well, and guess what? Those usually sit in a completely different department. Those usually sit in the sales department with the people that are actually on the phone with the person buying whatever they sell, right? Like there's a sales department in pretty much every company that is selling ketchup, washing machines, lumber, doesn't matter what it is. And the person they told them they were getting this product by a certain time and date, they're the first people to get yelled at when the truck doesn't show up. And guess who the first people they are to yell at once they find that out, right? Directly to the operations person.
Exactly.
Which is the person who gets slapped on the wrist every time a truck shows up late, or the wrong equipment shows up, or one of a number of things that you're trying to uncover to add value to be able to do better than the people they're already using, right?
Exactly. So let's go through some of the actual like positions, right? And what these people do. And for the sake of this, I would say a fairly larger company that's going to have multiple positions, right? So all the way down, I think back to when I worked at a large facility that had 205 dock doors. It was so big that it was split up into 5 different sections. Each one had its own freight manager, right, or freight supervisor that handled the inbound and outbound just for the trucks that went in and out of that door. And then it was managed by an overall manager for the whole facility. But again, as the shifts changed, those 5 supervisors would swap out, that manager would swap out, and then you had somebody in charge of the entire facility, right? So you're not going to, so if I relate that to a mid-sized shipper, whatever quote unquote logistics coordinator is at the dock checking trucks in and out, probably not going to be the decision maker that you want to talk to get onboarded and try to get tendered loads from, because it's not their job. They might love you and you might have a great conversation on the phone with them about something, but at the end of the day, they can't really do anything for you other than maybe point you in the right direction or put a good word in for you.
Those 2 things, though, are very, very valuable, right? At the onset, you don't know anybody and you don't know who does what and you don't know what's important to them, right? And just to the earlier example, they don't have decision-making ability, but they are working next to this person all day. They are seeing the frustrations. They're seeing the things that are going well. They're hearing, just by being in there, just like you were, the things that other managers are maybe complaining about more or wish they weren't that way, right? So they're great places to get insight into the things you want to uncover later, right? It's like your first few clues. Yeah, it doesn't give you the whole picture, but it gives you enough to get to the 3rd, 4th, and 5th, right? And to start uncovering the things that are actually relevant to this organization and ultimately the value you're trying to provide, right? And I want to say one thing about this. This is what we're really explaining when we say, when you try to sell all of your services to everybody you speak to, this is the opposite of this approach, right? The emails that say, I can do this, I can do LTL, full truckload, over-dimensional, air, ocean, anything you need, send it to me. We're great at everything, right? It doesn't mean anything to them until you understand what they need, right? It's that other cliche, like nobody is going to care what you have to say until they know how much you care. The best way to find out or to get them to know how much you care is to understand what they care about, right? It seems obvious, but it is the path that is the most direct to actually getting a new relationship.
Yeah. So to the point of like the dock hand, the logistics coordinator, whatever you want to call them, here's an actual example. This is about probably 8 years ago. So a guy that was an actual traffic manager who that became the customer who was tendering the loads out. He would hang out with the guys on the dock that helped coordinate make sure the trucks showed up and everything got loaded properly. And we grab a bite or a beer at the end of the day because they were local. But so he was able to tender the loads out, right? So it's a great person to have a relationship with, but he's hanging out with the guys on the dock. So you can kind of hear what they're frustrated about. But he wasn't the one that was able to approve a brokerage to come on board. That was his boss, or at one point it was his boss's boss. So, but he knew how to navigate that. Hey, we have to get through this director of transportation to make sure we can, X, Y, and Z. And what was important to him was, hey, if I want to get promoted sometime, I got to make sure my stats look good as far as,
yes.
Price is one of them, but it wasn't always, right? It was like, we have to get stuff delivered on time. We have to get trucks in and out in a certain amount of time. So the trucks after them have time to come in because there's only so many. It was a flatbed. It was flatbed freight, and they would load indoors, so it was covered from the elements, and they only had so much space in there, right? That's expensive real estate or very high priority real estate. But to be able to kind of go in there, especially meet them and navigate who's who and what's what, and see the operation, it's pretty wild. And what I thought was pretty cool is he had this thing that he called it the fishbowl. So in the middle of the traffic and loading, unloading area was this little plastic or plexiglass little booth. He called it the fishbowl, where he could see 360 all around to see where stuff's getting loaded, where the inbound and the outbound stuff is.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a person right there that truly has decision-making abilities when it comes to tendering out freight. He sees what's going on. He sees what's going good, what's not going good. But again, he wasn't able to just onboard whoever he wanted. And the way that he got started with us, because he really liked us and wanted to do business, was, you have the typical fallout loads from your top bidders. The classic C.H. Robinson drops 10% of their loads, right? Or whatever, even higher. And so that naturally becomes spot business. So instead of trying to go down the list and see who was next in the order, like the pick and order for that lane, hey, we like you guys are local. Here's what we got. And boom, we start to get a reputation on a couple spot loads. Boom. The next year we got invited to the bid, and you build a relationship that way. But it's all about being able to figure out who's who and who does what, because had we been prospecting just the director of logistics, right, he might say, cool, we can onboard you. But the guy that tenders the loads has no idea who I am or who we are. He's not going to, he doesn't care. Cool, you're on my approval list, but why am I going to give it to you? So it's important to understand and try to navigate through that. We had a little bit of an advantage being able to go in person and meet everybody and go sit down and have food and drink beers and whatnot. But it's just, it's important, man. I've heard too many instances of people that spend months building a great relationship and they get onboarded, and just like I used in the last example, it's not the person that tenders the freight. Cool, you're on board, but you're not going to get a single load.
Exactly. And that's why you really do need to approach it from both perspectives. And again, when we were asked, should you just go cold knock doors because I'm in person and it's more effective, right? These are the things that I would suggest you do before you start cold knocking doors, right? Getting an idea of what the job functions are, who does what, and then maybe try to reach out to somebody lower on the totem pole, get an understanding of what's important, and then maybe show up. And at least you have somebody you can ask for at that point. Like, hey, I was talking with Jimmy. I was in the neighborhood, seeing another client, thought I'd stop in. Is he here, right? Again, the easiest person for you to go and see is the lowest guy usually in the organization. They usually have the most flexibility, the most time, the least on their schedule. If you get in the door with them, there's a pretty high probability you will bump into the other people or be introduced. And if you now have at least a moment where you shook their hand, looked them in their eye, and talked for 30 seconds, when you call that person a week later, the efficacy of that phone call goes through the roof, right? Yep. But you knocking on a door with bagels, hoping you're going to be introduced to anybody but the secretary, isn't exactly the best use, I think, of time.
Very true.
All right. So the thing that I wanted to also go through for everyone is we get asked about FOB, what freight on board means. Well, there's two basic categories on how companies usually function and the way they ship things. And these are not always true. And this is, again, to the point of this whole episode of asking questions to find out what is actually true and what is just an assumption. Now, I'd say in your first example, you've got company A ships a product to company B. The company that ships it from A to B, company A is arranging the transportation. They are the ones tendering the freight. That is, I think, what most people assume is happening most of the time. The company that makes it arranges the truck to pick it up, to ship it to the person that purchased it, right? Now, that is like not necessarily, but it's like a delivered contract, meaning the person that bought the product from company A, call it lumber, they usually negotiate a price where the shipping is included in the overall price.
Correct.
Meaning, hey, this load of lumber is $100,000, but the bill is $105,000 because they just added transportation. It is a delivered contract. It's all included when they negotiate that. Like when you buy something from a company and they say, we'll ship it to your house, right? Similar. The second type is freight on board. Now, that is where company A makes the product, but company B, the one buying the product, says, I don't want you to handle the transportation. I've got carriers that give me better rates than I think you're going to charge me anyway. Or they think they might have the same rates, but they think the company they're buying from is charging them a premium to make a little bit of money on shipping. So they say, look, I want the load of lumber, but I will send my own truck. You tell me when to send it and he'll bring it to me. I will pay them directly. That is freight on board. You bought the lumber, you paid the freight yourself and arranged the transportation. Now, where it gets a little bit convoluted is that those are mixed up with most medium to larger shippers, meaning some of their business is tendered by them. Some of their business is and usually is also FOB. So when you run into the objection, whether you're talking to the person shipping it at company A and they say, no, our freight's FOB, they can say that with confidence because some of it actually is usually FOB, but usually not all of it and usually not the majority. And the same thing happens when you will call company B if you learn that from company A. So let's say I talk to company A and they go, hey, no, look, we sell most of our stuff to company B. They've got a bunch of locations. They handle all the transportation. It's all FOB. We do a few spot loads here and there, but most of our volume is actually handled by our customers. They send in their trucks. You'll call company B and they'll tell you the same thing. Oh, to be honest, like company A usually handles the transportation. We don't deal with that because maybe 1 out of 10 loads gets tendered by the person they're buying it from. So it is technically true, but it's not the whole truth, right? And as you start to ask questions, whether you're talking to company A or B in this scenario, right, this is how you have to uncover whether or not there's a real opportunity or you're speaking to the right person, right? So you want to ask a little bit deeper questions, maybe in your second call after you've maybe found this out, right? Like in this example, let's say I talk to company A and then call company B and both tell me the same thing. I'm going to call company A back. Not that day, but a couple of days later, maybe the next week, and go, hey, I'm just trying to get my arms around something. Like, I know we had chatted a week ago, and I know that you guys had said most of your stuff that you shipped to company B, whatever it is, like it is all kind of FOB. But I was talking to Sally over there, and she said, yeah, some of it is, but like there's a pretty good percentage that you guys also handle as well. Who would I need to speak to about possibly participating in that at some point? Just so that I can understand this. Again, I've got some guys that I think might be a fit to work on this business, but I just want to make sure I'm talking to the right person. When you go back after you've done the legwork, after they've asked you to call someone else, and then you come back, that shows initiative. It shows your willingness to go the extra mile, and it's earned you usually a better answer. And usually just by doing that, when you call back that person a week or two later, you'll get a better explanation or a better understanding of usually what's happening there.
Yeah, I mean, because I'll add the phrase FOB or customer routed is another way people will say it, is a huge blow off technique. It's a big objection that customers will throw out there because they just don't want to talk to whoever's prospecting them. If you get a little bit more information, you can go back to them and say, hey, I talked to so-and-so over here about X, Y, and Z. Well, they can't really throw that objection at you without giving you some more context or talking to you more about it. So,
and that's why you always write the name down to the people you're speaking, because that adds the legitimacy, right?
Exactly. We got anything else on the different roles and who to prospect?
No, I mean, I think we've covered quite a bit of that from a 101 level. It should give people the insight to start asking some better questions and at least giving you some more of the tools to do the research so that you're not just randomly calling organizations asking for the shipping department and then going to the next one.
But hey, I will say lastly, if your first cold call you pick up and you sound like an idiot and you're just asking for the traffic department, good for you. You made the call.
Exactly.
You made the call. I forget who it was. I heard a guy in the last couple of weeks talking about how he grew a large business, and he said the first the first 100 or first 500 calls that he made to prospective buyers were the hardest, but the most impactful ever because it got him going, right? And every time he did it, he got a little bit better. And he wasn't in freight. He was in, I don't even know what it was. It was like building out gyms or something like that. But it was a really impactful takeaway that just shows that it takes time and repetitions to get better and better to be proficient at something.
Absolutely. And there's two very simple reasons for it, right? Like one is that's why we suggest large volumes when you start. It's not because we think you're just going to get success immediately. It's because of two things. One, you need, like you said, to be able to do something repetitively, right? That's like the mother of learning. Everything you do over and over again, you start to get better at. But the other important thing is you need feedback to be able to feel and to learn to determine whether or not it is working or not working. And when you only make a few calls a day, it's just very slow in what you're getting information back, and your learning curve is much shallower and it takes a long time. If I call 100 people a day, that's why door knockers end up being like very good salespeople, the ones that can make it. Because if you knock on a door and you get that door slammed, it hurts. You feel it personally. You will change the next door you knock. If they slam the door in your face, you will think very hard walking to the next door as to why that door was slammed. And you are literally learning and changing what you're doing to avoid the pain. Yeah. That's why, to that guy's point, the first 500 you make are so impactful because they're difficult. You're going to feel awkward. They're going to be scary. You're going to feel pain in your chest and tension and resistance. But once you push through it and to take action, you're going to learn really fast what is effective and what isn't just by avoiding the pain and the feedback you're getting, right?
100%. Yeah, bigger sample size gives you more feedback, 100%. Well, we got a lot of Q&A I want to get to today. So without further ado, are you looking to take your freight brokerage or agency to the next level? Look no further than Lean Solutions Group. They are industry leaders in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices located in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of exciting positions, including freight broker back office operations, accounting, tech and web development, business development, marketing, customer service, and more. Don't miss out on the opportunity to work with the best in the business. Visit their website at www.leangroup.com to learn more about the exciting solutions they have to offer. That's LEAN group.com. All right, we got 4 questions today. The first one, and I've heard this a lot, is there any benefit to buying someone else's MC? So let me give you a little context. I had somebody once ask me, hey, customer wants 2 years, wants your brokerage to be in business for at least 2 years before they can even consider onboarding you. Can I just go buy someone's old MC and do it that way? I mean, there's a potential in that aspect. I'll tell you, I've never once heard of someone buying someone else's MC for that reason and it working out. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing we just said about 500 calls, right? What you learn in that first that first big portion of time doing your job, it helps shape who you are. These companies that want 2 years of authority before they'll work with you probably are some big players in the shipping world, right? And if you don't have 2 years of experience yourself, which is the reason they want that 2 years of authority, you might fall on your face pretty bad. I would say the caveat to that would be something along the lines of maybe you've been a broker for 12 years working for somebody else and you want to go start your own shop. Then there might be a case to be made for that. But I would also just try to find a loophole or get an exception to policy with that company just by explaining like, hey, I just started my brokerage 6 months ago, but I've been successful in this field for, a decade and a half now. What are your thoughts on buying someone's MC?
I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think there's any benefit on the carrier side of maybe I'm new to this, but at the very least, if I have a brokerage MC that's over a year old, I have less hurdles with getting carriers to work with me?
Yeah, there's some benefit there, but also if you don't run any loads, and we have a question on that later on. You don't have any credit history, right? Yeah. You don't have any reviews on DAT or wherever. Look, people do it all the time. They get their authority. They either get their authority and let it sit there to get some age, or they buy someone's authority to have some age behind it. you can do it and there's nothing wrong with it. But I think if you're not actually doing the job, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're taking a shortcut and you're not learning what you could be learning along the lines. It might help you out a little bit, but I also would ask, like, how much are you paying for? Because there's going to come a point where it's just not worth paying.
Correct.
An exorbitant amount of money to have an MC that's 8 years old versus starting one fresh. So, and on top of that, the FMCSA does record changes in ownership, changes in name, all that stuff. So if you buy someone's MC and then you go in and you change the name to you and the ownership to you, that stuff is researchable on the Safer system online. So I don't care. I'm not going to hate you if you buy someone else's MC, but I think a lot of people do it for the wrong reasons.
Agreed.
That's my take on it.
I think, and there's a good litmus test. I heard this on a podcast last week. Rob Dyrdek actually said it. The guy who's
ridiculousness, Rob Dyrdek.
Yeah, but he's worth something like $500 million with his production company now, and really impressive what he did since then. Long story short, though, he kind of uses this litmus test. He goes, if I find myself trying to consider an option, he's like, I always ask, am I doing this to make the hard work easier, or am I doing it because it's more effective? And he's like, it's usually the first. He's like, it's usually my tendency to want to avoid the hard thing. And he's like, as soon as I can tell that, he's like, I immediately eliminate as an option because it's just me not wanting to do the hard thing. Right. To your point, we see this a lot with like, I don't want to make phone calls to prospect business. I'll send emails. Right. Yeah. Because, well, hey, I'll spend more money on marketing and we've got a travel budget. So I'll see more clients. It's easier now when I work for this company than when I work for the other company. And it's like, you're really just trying to make excuses to avoid the hard thing you don't want to do. Exactly. And we all do that. I mean,
next question. What are accessorials? So check out a lot of our other content that breaks down accessorials. But it's an extra charge, right? It's things like detention, layover, lumper, liftgate, driver assist. These are things that happen in addition to your base line haul price. So if the truck is going to cost $1,000 to get from A to B, but they got stuck at the loading facility for 6 hours, right? They can get paid detention as an accessorial because it's going to compensate them for their time. We're not going to get too in the weeds on what each one pays and what constitutes it, but truck order not used is another one. You hire a truck, you cancel them, you're going to pay them for their time. It's an accessorial. It's not the base line haul. It's something in addition. Is there any other way to simplify that? It's just an extra charge.
That was direct.
All right. Next one. How much can I earn running just 200 miles with a cargo van? All right. So the reason I picked this came from our Facebook group. The reason I picked it is because it doesn't matter necessarily the equipment type or the mileage, because you could run a cargo van at $2 a mile and make $400, or you could run a cargo van for a very time urgent aircraft part that's an aircraft on ground or AOG, and it's got to get to this facility. Otherwise that plane's not flying, and you could make 40% margin on it. So I will tell you that the cargo van, box truck, that expedite small and could get there quick, that market is definitely a niche for both brokers and for the actual motor carriers that operate with fleets like that, because it is often time sensitive stuff that if it does not get there, there is a massive cost and burden to that company for the failure of it being delivered. So yeah, that's my take on that. What are your thoughts? Any other takeaways on?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it. I think one is I think there's a good rule of thumb that cargo vans are usually about 15% less than what you're going to see on a van rate for similar things if you looked at averages. But I do think it matters way more, to your point. Who are you working with? What is the type of freight you're working with? And what is the urgency? Like, if you're running airports and you're running last mile and you're running any white glove service, right? Like that is expedited, you could get 2, 3, 4 times that. You could get 10 times that. Honestly, just based on the urgency, your track record, your reliability, who you're working with, and the type of relationships you established is also like the biggest reason you're going to determine what you're actually going to make doing this kind of work.
Yeah. Another thing too is, I I think New York City is a great example of this.
Yes.
There are certain areas where certain equipment cannot get to very easily. And like to give you New York City as an example, even your big LTL carriers, their freight gets transloaded outside of the city and put on like a cartage company, basically like smaller trucks will go deliver all of it because the bridges are too low. They can't turn as tightly around certain intersections. So whenever you have something specialized like that, it's gonna have its advantages, and again, it's cost to go along with it. So good stuff. Last one. This kind of brings us back to the first one. It's I'm gonna read the email the guy sent us so I don't miss it here. He said. Greetings. I just have a quick question and would love y'all's professional opinion on the matter. I'm looking into expanding my knowledge of the transportation business. I would like to learn the freight brokering side of it. My question is, would it be counterproductive to open up and get my own authority as a broker, but not actually practice it, just have it in hand and obtain some practice working under another brokerage? Once I'm comfortable doing it all on my own, I would do it under my own authority since it would have already been established. So, interesting. Here's what I like about it. He's not taking the shortcut that we mentioned before, but he's finding a more efficient or effective way to go about doing business. So he's going to have experience by working for somebody else, and his authority will have some time on it. And I've seen this, so I'm not opposed to it. And the reason is I've seen people that were a freight agent, and they knew, hey, I really do want to build my own business out. I don't want to be in the trenches every day doing this. I want to start my own brokerage. I got to figure out what is the path to getting from where I am now to there. And a lot of the big hurdles are, do you have the money to cash flow it? And if not, do you have relationships with factoring companies? Your authority is going to be brand spanking new, right? And a way you can do it is get that authority. And even we talked to Desmond, right? He got his own authority. He didn't do a single thing with it for like 6 months. So it had a little bit of age behind it, but he still had to overcome a lot of the hurdles of, well, you have no credit, you ran no loads, you got no reputation, right? So what some people would do is they'll, while they're working for a brokerage, as long as it's not violating an exclusivity contract, they'll establish their own. And if they've got some good quality carriers that they've worked with in their existing company, they'll start to run a few loads with reputable customers and reputable carriers that they already know and have a relationship with, a couple at a time in their newly established, newly authorized brokerage company, and build up slowly a credit reputation and just overall experience running it on their own, as long as the company that they're already with is okay with it. What you don't want is, hey, I'm a W-2 employee for TQL. I'm going to go start my own authority. They're probably not going to be okay with you doing that.
Yeah, you definitely have an exclusive agreement if you are W-2. If you're 1099, you may not have exclusivity, but I agree with everything you've said.
Yeah, I've seen in the 1099 world, it's typically not exclusive. I have seen companies that are exclusive, though, and when they found somebody started their own authority, and they found out, not because the person told them, but they just found out some other way, they're like, it kind of feels like you're doing us dirty here. Like you're doing something behind our back.
We got one foot out the door. I mean,
exactly.
To be honest, if you're going to hire somebody, put yourself in their shoes.
Yes, precisely. So, but good questions. I appreciate everyone sending them in. It's one of my favorite parts of every episode is to answer what you guys want. Next week will be the big 200th episode for us. And send us over some of your topic requests for the full-length episodes. We're obviously there's not 200 different unique topics to talk about specifically in freight. So a lot of our stuff tends to be either regurgitated or just a different aspect of the same thing. Like we've got a ton of stuff on prospecting and lead generation and operational stuff. But let us know what you guys want to hear and what you want us to talk about, and we'll make sure we do our best. We've been doing a good job getting some more folks on as guests as well. And we're actually going to be on with Kevin Hill on Put That Coffee Down in one of his next audio only podcasts. So if you're a listener of his show, check it out, and you'll get to hear your boys Ben and Nate as guests on there soon. So anything else we got?
That is everything I had. Pretty much the focus on what I'm going to be doing the rest of the afternoon of another podcast is going and doing more prospecting and uncovering who the people are that I need to do business with. So,
very good. All righty. Final thoughts, Ben.
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.